I got kicked out of my home at 17 and broke all the limits. See how I transformed my life. My name is Clara. I'm 28 years old today, but I'll never forget the 17 years my life fell apart in a way I never imagined possible. I was always the extra child in my family, the one no one really saw, the one who accepted things so as not to cause problems. My brother Nathan was always the favorite, the perfect son, the athlete, the popular one. And that day, everything changed. He caused a car accident, but I, unable to see my family destroyed or my brother punished, took the blame. I thought it was the right thing to do, that maybe they would forgive me, that their love would be greater than any mistake, but it wasn't. I was thrown out of the house. My mother, Laura, just hung her head as if abandoning me. My father, Emmanuel, called me useless, a burden, and pushed me out the door with a contempt that burned into my skin. I left with a bag of old clothes and $12 in my pocket. Without a working cell phone, with no one to support me, the world seemed too big and too cold. The street was my only company, but I was determined to survive. That night I felt completely invisible and crushed by shame, fear, and anger at seeing my brother, unpunished, laughing and maintaining his perfect image. But even in despair, something inside me didn't break. I promised myself that I would bounce back, that no one, not even my family, would define who I would be. On my first day away from home, the feeling of loss was overwhelming. Every step I took through the street seemed to echo the failure my family saw in me. I remember walking for hours, just trying to figure out where I could go, where I could hide from reality. People's faces seemed indifferent, and with every corner I felt my loneliness grow. I had nowhere to run, no one to ask for help. Every cafe, every shop, every small shelter seemed out of reach. The feeling of abandonment tightened my chest in a physical way, making it almost impossible to breathe. I cried, hiding behind lampposts and benches, but never for anyone to see me. I was alone and needed to learn to be strong. I had never imagined I could feel so much fear and hatred at the same time. Fear of what would come next. Hatred of having been betrayed by the blood that was supposed to protect me. But even with all this, a spark of clarity began to emerge. If I wanted to survive, I needed to act, find ways, learn to fend for myself. It was the first time I felt like my life depended solely on me, and it brought a strange mixture of dread and determination. The second day was an even bigger shock. I got a temporary job at a diner, bussing tables and washing dishes for hours on end. I never imagined my routine would be so tough that every penny earned would cost me sweat, aching feet, and aching hands. But with each passing hour, I felt something growing within me, a sense of control over at least part of my life. I could choose to work, choose to earn my own money, even if it was little, even if it was just enough for a sandwich and a coffee. The feeling of independence, however small, began to give me strength. I couldn't trust my family, but I could trust myself. And it was at that moment that I realized that freedom came at a high price, but it was worth every second of pain and effort. The nights were the worst. Sleeping on park benches, in closed shop doors, anywhere that felt safe was a constant. Exercise and endurance. I felt cold, hungry, lonely, but also a sense of clarity. Nothing I had before could save me, so I needed to learn to save myself. Every person on the street seemed to be carrying their own life, but no one seemed to notice my invisible struggle. It was humiliating and heartbreaking, but it also taught me self-worth in a strange way. I didn't need applause, just survival. And this sense of survival began to morph into something greater. It began to turn into hope. It was during this period that I realized my life wouldn't be defined by my brother's mistake, nor by my parents' contempt. I could use every tear, every sleepless night, every hard-earned penny as fuel to create something greater. That day, sitting on a cold bench, looking at the city lights, I finally understood that my life didn't have to be a reflection of family injustice. I could be more than the extra. I could be someone who survived, who carved out a niche, who rose again despite the weight of abandonment. And it was at that moment that I began to plan my escape from poverty, my path to independence and self-worth. In the months that followed, each day was a constant challenge, but also a hard life lesson. I worked long hours in jobs no one wanted to do, from cleaning to serving at a cafeteria, always saving every penny. Sleep remained a problem. Many nights were spent on park benches, hiding in store doorways, or even in small open waiting rooms. But each sacrifice reminded me that I was building something for myself, something no one could take away. My body ached, my feet bled, my hands were calloused, but I was alive, and that was a victory in itself. Gradually, I began to understand that strength is not the absence of fear or pain, but carrying on despite them. A sense of power over my own life began to grow, even amidst the despair I felt remembering my parents' rejection. At work, I learned more than practical skills. I learned to deal with difficult people, to manage my own money, to be accountable for schedules, tasks, and small decisions that, until then, had been controlled by others. Every spare change I saved was a step toward my independence. Every person who ignored me, every judgmental look, served to strengthen my determination. I didn't need anyone's approval, but I did need to believe I could succeed. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness when I thought of Nathan, laughing at his perfect life while I struggled not to disappear into the street. But with each challenge I overcame, I realized my pain could be transformed into motivation. I was learning that my survival depended solely on me, and this gave me a clarity I'd never had before. School continued to be a difficult place. I had to study while working, which meant sleepless nights and endless days. But every notebook I filled, every test I took, was proof that I could overcome any obstacle. I learned to value my effort, my commitment to myself. It wasn't easy dealing with fatigue, hunger, and loneliness, but the feeling of progress gave me the strength to keep going. I realized that even though I was rejected by my family, I could still create my own story. With each small success, I felt something inside me grow stronger, and the anger of being ignored and underestimated by Nathan and my parents began to turn into fuel. I began to dream of a different future, imagining a life where I wouldn't depend on anyone. Over time, I managed to save enough money to rent a small apartment, nothing luxurious, but my own. Feeling like I had a roof over my head, that my things were mine, gave me a sense of dignity I'd never felt before. It was an important step because I finally began to feel like I was creating a place in the world that didn't depend on the approval or lies of others. The feeling that my life could be built with my own hands was liberating, but also frightening. Every penny, every effort, every decision reminded me that I needed to be strong at all times. The most significant turning point came one rainy morning when, after another exhausting shift, I looked around my small apartment and realized that, despite all the suffering, I was managing to stay on my feet. For the first time, I felt I could truly transform my life, that it didn't need to be defined by my brother's mistakes or my parents' contempt. The feeling of relief was mixed with a powerful clarity. I could rebuild myself. I could become someone worthy of respect, someone with value, someone who wasn't just an afterthought in someone else's life. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't stop until I proved to myself and anyone who doubted me that I could succeed. Over time, my efforts began to yield visible results. I was able to open my own small business, something modest, but my own. Each satisfied customer was a small victory. Each compliment fueled me to keep going. That's when I began to realize that my life didn't need to be limited by the past. I could build something concrete, something no one could take from me. The feeling of independence was overwhelming, but also frightening. Fear of failure, fear of going back to square one, fear that all the suffering hadn't been worth it. But the strength I felt within myself, that resilience built through months of struggle and sleepless nights, kept me going. I had learned to transform pain into determination, loneliness into focus, fear into action. At the same time, I began to notice different perspectives from the community. People who had previously ignored me began to notice my effort, my commitment, and my ability to stand on my own 2 feet. Some hand-picked friends emerged, people who didn't judge me for my past but recognized my courage. I still felt pain remembering the family that abandoned me, but I began to understand that true support didn't come from those born alongside me, but from those who were truly there for me. Each day taught me something new about confidence, about valuing my own ability to overcome obstacles, about not allowing anyone to define my story. One morning, I received an unexpected call. It was my grandmother, the only one who had always believed in me. She told me how proud she was of me and how she had documented everything that had happened to my family. For the first time, I felt that my suffering had not been in vain, that someone saw my pain and my struggle clearly. The feeling of justice was slight but powerful. She told me that she was with me, that the inheritance and everything that could guarantee my stability was reserved for me. I cried for hours, mixing relief with a deep sadness for everything I had lost. But I felt, in that moment, that the validation I had always wanted finally existed. As my business grew, the impact on me was deeper than just financial. I began to see myself as someone capable of earning respect, of being recognized on my own merit, of having a valuable existence in the world. Every night of hard work, every obstacle overcome, every disappointment transformed into a learning experience. All of this made me realize that my life was finally in my hands. The sense of freedom I felt was unique, unlike any expectations my family had of me. I was proving to myself and others that surviving wasn't enough. I could thrive. The first moment I felt I had truly turned a corner in my life was when I was publicly recognized by the community. People who had previously ignored me began to congratulate me for my work, my effort, my courage to stand up for myself. The feeling of achievement was indescribable. It wasn't revenge, it was real life. It was merit. It was proof that every tear, every sleepless night, every hard-earned penny, all of it had been worth it. For the first time, I felt my existence wasn't defined by lies or anyone's contempt. I had a place, a name, a value, and no one could take that away from me. Years later, when my life was finally beginning to feel stable and recognized, my family reappeared. Nathan, my brother, tried to get closer, as if nothing had happened, as if it were solely my fault. My mother, Laura, and my father, Emmanuel, seemed surprised by how much I had grown, by the life I had built. But I knew they weren't coming for me. They were coming out of self-interest, ego, and a desire to look good in front of others. For the first time, I felt complete clarity. I didn't need their approval, and I would no longer allow them to manipulate me. All the fear, all the pain, all the loneliness of that past gave me the strength to face that moment with coolness, but also with justice. The day of the confrontation was strange. My heart was pounding, a mix of nervousness and anger, but I maintained my composure. I didn't need to scream or plead. Every word was thought out, every gesture calculated for what I wanted to convey. Boundaries. I showed the truth, with evidence, with stories, with accounts from my grandmother, who had documented everything. I showed how Nathan manipulated everyone around him, how my mother always kept quiet, how my father favored the perfect son while pushing me out of the house. It was painful, because I still felt love mixed with hurt, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt my voice had power, that my pain finally had value, that it wasn't just the leftovers. Their reaction was mixed. Nathan was furious, trying to reverse everything, but without arguments, only rage and despair. My mother cried, trying to justify her past actions, but her words were no longer effective. My father remained silent, but I saw in his eyes a mixture of surprise and restrained respect. I didn't need forgiveness. I just needed to be recognized and respected. And in that moment, I felt something I never imagined, a sense of control over my own story. I was no longer the 17-year-old girl, alone, scared, and rejected. I was a woman who had survived, who had risen again, and who could finally stand up to the family that had ignored me. The conversation lasted hours, but it wasn't confrontational. It was more like a reckoning, the exposure of truths that had been hidden for years. I maintained clear boundaries. There was no more room for manipulation, lies, or emotional abuse. They could choose whether to accept it or not, but my life no longer depended on it. It was strange to feel this mixture of power and relief. For years, I'd carried a weight that wasn't mine, and I finally felt I could let it go, that the validation I needed didn't come from them, but from myself and my grandmother, who had always been by my side. That day, for the first time, I felt no fear, no shame. I felt recognition, clarity, and strength. I realized that all the suffering, all the lonely nights, all the effort to survive and rebuild myself had prepared me for that moment. I didn't need to be saved. I didn't need to be forgiven. I didn't need to be accepted. I had already won. But my confrontation wasn't revenge, it was justice. And for the first time, I felt that my story was mine alone, and no one could rewrite it. Shortly after the confrontation, I received the news that my grandmother had passed away. The pain was intense because I knew her presence had always been my anchor, my safe haven. But along with the sadness came a feeling of justice and recognition. She left me the house where I grew up, as well as an inheritance that guaranteed my stability. For the first time, I felt that all my efforts had made complete sense. Everything I had been through, every tear, every fear, every abandonment, had culminated in that moment. It was as if my grandmother was finally telling me that I was seen, that I had value, that my life mattered. Entering the house and realizing it was truly mine brought me a mixture of nostalgia and relief. Every room, every old object, reminded me of everything I'd lost, but also of how much I'd grown. For the first time, I felt my past was no longer a prison, but a foundation for building my future. A sense of worthiness began to solidify within me. I was no longer the rejected girl, no longer a leftover or an extra. I was Clara, someone who had survived, fought, and conquered. The pain was still there, of course, but now there was room for relief, hope, and concrete plans. With the financial stability and security provided by my inheritance, I was able to invest more in my business, expand my achievements, and begin helping others facing difficult situations. I began to realize that my story could inspire others, that my experience of overcoming adversity had value beyond my own life. I felt proud of myself, something I had never fully felt before. It was strange to feel pride without depending on anyone's approval, but at the same time, liberating. Each day was a confirmation that my resilience and determination had brought me this far. My family still struggled to accept all of this. Nathan continued to try to justify his actions. My mother tried superficially to make amends, and my father remained distant. But I realized I didn't need complete reconciliation. My victory didn't depend on them. What mattered was that I finally had control over my life, my choices, and my well-being. I could decide who would have a place in it and who wouldn't. And this brought profound relief, a sense of freedom I'd never felt before. Today, when I think of that 17-year-old girl, I feel a mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness for everything she went through, for all the pain and abandonment. Pride for her strength, her resilience, and her ability to rise again. I know that some of the pain will never completely disappear, but I've learned to live with it without it defining me. My life is now mine, built with my own hands, my mistakes, my successes, and my courage. And that is the truest victory anyone can have, to exist with value, worth, and autonomy.